But I got to ask you, Jayson, because I know that you are a fantasy guy, and I purposely left an extra ticket to Fantasy Isle, and I'm asking, would you like to join me on Fantasy Island?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right,
I would. You got 2 tickets to
Sammy,
paradise. Let's go.
we got it. Sammy, roll the animation. Let's go to the island.
Welcome to our Fantasy Island.
And joining us now on Fantasy Island. No, Jayson, I'm just kidding. But you're a writer for drrodo.com. Tell us a little bit about that site.
Dr. Rodo is a friend. The first podcast I ever did was 11 years ago with Dr. Rodo. We were both at Mark Cardano, part of Sports Grid now, on this little football site when I first started getting in the industry called Extra Point Football. They were bought out by Rodo Experts. And so we did stuff on Sirius XMs, but it all started with me and him doing our first podcast 11 years ago called Fantasy to Reality. And this is what he really pulled me into the fantasy industry, because he would run the one chair, I would do the two chair. He would lay it out. I would break down the X's and O, and he would give the fantasy spin to it. And again, this was over a decade ago. And so we really enjoyed the chemistry, and he's just a great dude. He was on Sirius XM for years, and actually one of his listeners saved his life. He had to get a transplant. And without that transplant, Doc wouldn't be here today. Listener donated. Forgive me. My recall's horrible. As I said, I can't remember which body part, but the listener gave him the transplant, saved Doc's life. And Doc is just one of the most genuinely authentic good guys around. Runs drrodo.com, a great site over there. I have to write my wide receiver versus cornerback article later today. Gave my first look at DFS week 3 for the DraftKings slate. So yeah, just a lot of great talent over there. Chris Kennedy. When I was at Rodo Expert, I worked with Jake Seeley and Pat Mayo, and you could just see these guys' work ethic and knowledge. Chris Kennedy's the next Pat Mayo and Jake Seeley. The guy's work ethic. And if you're a golf guy and you find yourself up there in Martha's Vineyard, he's also a GM of one of the golf courses up there. So you have to hit him up, Adam.
Well, I'll have to hit him up. And Pat Mayo, one of the great guys, love going on with Patty Mayo. Although I can't remember the last time I talked fantasy with him, because we're always talking MTV Real World Challenge. But talking about fantasy, nice. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, though, that Underdog Fantasy is the easiest way to play fantasy sports. It's simple to get started. Just head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app, sign in using the promo code SICK, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Like, listen, if you're sitting there, you're bummed out this season because you drafted CeeDee Lamb or Kyle Pitts or maybe both of them, and you're like, I need to start over. Well, you go over to Underdog Fantasy, download that app right now. And again, just use the code SICK. It's not just, there's so many games. You will be enthralled. You'll probably end up, you know what, not spending a lot of time at work. You'll be so enthused. So check out our friends at Underdog Fantasy, one of the best sites out there. I implore you. So
Adam, can I jump on the Underdog real quick?
Please do.
Oh my gosh, the best ball drafts, the format, everything on there is one of the best. Last year I spent so much just doing it's addictive. Those best ball drafts, everyone loves drafting. If you like seasonal, you love drafting, this kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Went over there and I did so many best ball drafts, and it's a great format they use as well.
No, 100%. If you're not familiar with best ball drafting, it is really an addictive way to play fantasy football. And I am at some point will probably move exclusively to best ball. And that's pretty much like whenever somebody, asks me to do these leagues. Now we do pros versus Joes. We do the Scott Fishbowl, a lot of those big ones. But normally when people are like, hey, we're raising money, I'm like, okay, either you get a donation or make it best ball. And if it's on Underdog, it's even better. And there's a lot. So again, like, listen, you'll get a deposit doubled. So go in there and try it out. What do you got to lose? But $100, but Underdog's going to double it for you. So you're going to be just fine. Just use that promo code SICK. I do want to talk though. We'll talk about Dameon Pierce and everything like that. I think that if I remember this correctly, did you recently tweet out about who is it? Isaiah Likely of the Baltimore Ravens. Okay. You're on board with him, right?
Dude, I didn't evaluate him. So I got a late start on draft evaluation. peel the curtain back a little bit. I took the last year off to kind of work on myself. I know it sounds cliche and corny, but sometimes
Right.
we have to do that to just keep
Got it. Yeah.
developing as
Totally.
human. And so I got a late start on the draft process, really late. I didn't watch Isaiah Likely. I watched him in the preseason. I'm like, who is this kid? I'm originally from
Yeah.
South Carolina. He went to Coastal Carolina. So I love pulling for Houston kids and South Carolina kids. So it's not from South Carolina, went to Coastal. So it intrigued me. Then I watched him. I'm like, this kid is legit. And if the Ravens draft a tight end, there's a 90% chance he's going to be a stud. But this guy, I mean, and especially with the limitation on the wide receiver depth. Now, I love Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman, if probably the closest thing to Chad Johnson route running coming out of the draft. Love Rashad Bateman. And when you have a mobile quarterback, and something Chicago has on their side with Justin Fields, that mobility with two stud running backs behind you will open up the passing games. They just need the studs in the receiving game. And I do like Darnell Mooney. Hasn't translated this year. We've seen it in the most recent years.
Fair.
But the mobility is such an advantage. I always remember this stat one. Vince Young and Kerry Collins were taking reps for the Titans, and Chris Johnson's running crazy. Games that VY was under center and that mobility was out there, Chris Johnson averaged 30 more yards a game. So that's something that return is going to come in Chicago, and it's already coming in Baltimore. Rashad Bateman, his value is just going to go up week after week.
No, I love that offense. I know too, because Greg Roman's offense always just funnels to the tight end. It's not a Lamar Jackson thing. It's just the way that offense is run. And we saw it in San Francisco and everything like that. So that's why during the preseason, when I was talking about Likely, people are like, well, he's a backup tight end. I'm like, yeah, but like a backup tight end in Baltimore is like the wide receiver too, and like on a different team. So it's like, it's worth having him. Like you're not starting him.
No,
but he's good. He's good to be rostered. And I think that, and listen, I don't know how you feel about this because I'm not giving up on this guy. Everybody's freaking out about Kyle Pitts. But I think that number one, he went up against New Orleans week 1. New Orleans has handled him in all 3 games he's played against them. New Orleans doesn't allow him to do anything. Last week, he was going up against the Los Angeles Rams, and they decided to put Jalen Ramsey on him.
Right.
How do you feel about Kyle Pitts? Like, do you think that he can, rebound? Because I know a lot of people invested a lot of draft capital in him.
With the ability to move, line up at wide receiver, tight end, shift them into favorable matchups, that he's going to get value. The problem is he's limited by Mariota. Yeah. I mean, you don't have a true stand in the pocket, go through your progressions, hit the guy, get him the ball no matter what, think it out. Let's go back to it, the mobility side of it. You've got a wide receiver, return man, running back in Cordero Patterson. I mean, they're going for matchup problems. With Mariota, they know they don't have a ton of receiving options, so they're going with making the defense rock back and forth on their heels and the toes. Are we going backwards? We're going forward. And that's what you have with Mariota and Cordero Patterson. But it'll only get you so far, and Mariota's just not an efficient passer and taking advantage of small windows. And with the matchups you talked about in the first couple weeks for Kyle Pitts, we're talking about minimal windows that Mariota has to make those dime type throws in, and that's not his game. You give him some zone looks, let him open up 3 to 5 yard windows, let him pop it in there. You'll play to his strength. But at this point, the limitations in the quarterback play.
I just want to know how on God's green earth Arthur Smith finds a way to scheme open Delaney Walker,
nice,
Jonnu Smith. All these guys, and you've got a 6'6" freak. Figure it out. That's all I'm asking.
What's his wingspan? Like 7 foot? I mean, I think he's like
12 feet.
No. Yes. So maybe off an inch or 2, right?
Whatever. But how? Because that's the whole thing. Like Delaney Walker had some of his best seasons with 100%. Marcus Mariota. So I'm like, oh, this is a slam dunk. And then you've got a unicorn. It's going to be amazing. And it hasn't worked out, and people are angry. But listen, since I know your expertise lies in the wide receivers, I want to talk about some wide receivers. I mentioned him a moment ago. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I mentioned it in my head. But CeeDee Lamb is another guy. Oh, I was talking about when you're talking about underdog. CeeDee Lamb has been frustrating, and I got caught up in following. I'm going to blame Matt Harmon of Yahoo Sports for leading me down. I'll blame Harmon like all the time, but Oh man, I wanted to resist CD Lamb. I bought in a couple of places. I've had him in like some dynasty and some keeper leagues. Is
Sure.
this ever going to turn around? I know the targets are there already, and it's not producing. Is it ever going to turn around? Is CD Lamb going to be a legitimate number one wide receiver at any point?
If you ask for the season, I say 100%. But where we're at right now, we were talking about the stat completion percent minus expected completion percent. The only two guys worse than Justin Fields and Davis Mills this season are Trey Lance and Dak Prescott. And it surprised me with Dak Prescott, but I was like, wow, so he was really missing that. And you go back and look at CD Lamb the first week, what do you have? A couple receptions on like 11 targets?
11 targets.
2 receptions, 11 targets, if I'm not mistaken. And then you come back this week and it's more efficient. So whatever it is, Rush can get them the ball. There will be PPR value. But if we're talking about like a DraftKings or FanDuel or whoever main slate, you're looking at that price bracket. Here, I wrote it down for an article yesterday. That price bracket for wide receivers where CD's coming in at, I mean, you've got Pittman at 6,900. If he's healthy this week, Matt Ryan's going to throw him 20 targets.
100%.
Waddle's a number one. They got 2 number ones in Miami. They're going to take 60, 70% of the targets. Mike Williams at 6,700. Waddle 6,800. Pittman 6,900. CD 6,600. You can't pull that trigger. Mike Williams showed you he's a true number one when Keenan's out of the lineup. He's going to get you the touchdown production with Herbert if he's even 70, 80% of himself. All those other guys, the value is so much higher in that tier. So he kills your value because I don't think the touchdowns are there.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I had to trade him this week for James Robinson. I needed an RB2. I have a team that has Justin Jefferson and Rashad Bateman, and I'm like, I'm going to make this move. And if CD blows up, so be it. But it's like I can't go through the heartache every week with him.
I'm still on Etienne. Now, Adam, I love your expertise. So let me, if you don't mind, let me pick your brain on this. Etienne, Trevor Lawrence, obviously we know about the chemistry at Clemson and everything. This guy, every game at Clemson, I'm a Clemson fan. I grew up a Clemson fan. Let me just pull that back. It's the only team I really still pull for. I don't have allegiance anywhere else. But Clemson, I love them. And I watched every snap they took. Every game, if you gave Etienne the workload, there's a 40-plus yard play coming. Week one, I think he had like 4 carries. 1 went for 27 yards. He had like 2 receptions. 1 went for 23 yards. These are 20-plus yard plays. Now, everyone's like James Robinson. He had a good game, but almost 50% of that production came on 1 run last week. You take away that 1 massive run, 30, almost 40 yards, and him and Etienne are both right there in that 2 to 3 yards of carry range. The running game's struggling there, but the fact that Robinson has value is that he's getting those short yardage, goal line carries and everything else. And Lawrence was one of a few quarterbacks to throw 600-plus passes last year. So there's efficiency there.
By the way, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, comment sick. If you're listening on audio, please leave a 5-star review and write sick as well. It helps us out. And it allows us to continue to put out great content like this, have great guests like Jayson in as well. So we really appreciate that, everybody who's listening and watching and continuing on through this after party. Now, you talked about, it's interesting to talk about Jacksonville because I think that James Robinson's value does come from the volume. I love Travis Etienne as well, and I would be buying him if I could. I think people are still holding on to him because what I saw in week 1 is that he dropped a touchdown pass. That happens. Trevor Lawrence missed him on another one. So you look at the usage, you're like, okay, he's on the cusp of being really good. I just really think that the way that the Jags are broken down is that, number one, Christian Kirk is their number 1 wide receiver. They're making no mistake. All of us who thought that Evan Ingram was going to be a thing, like that might not work out because I think they really like both running backs. And as we see, we look around the league, we see what the Packers are doing. We see what the Broncos are doing. We see what eventually the Bears will probably be doing. Even Houston's doing it a little bit with Dameon Pierce and Rex Burkhead. These teams just run 2 running backs. Like it's very difficult to find those situations where it's a singular running back and he's going to get all the carries. Both those guys, James Robinson and Etienne, have capabilities to be very productive. So I really like that. So, I'm comfortable with James Robinson. I mean, he did have that big run. I mean, that's the thing that we talk about. But I think it's with both players because, like, Etienne has not been, like, we're expecting him to pop up.
That's
think
fair.
both these guys have big playability. That's why I would take a risk. I'm probably going to take a bath. I'm going to look like an idiot, which is fine. But I had to make a move. I had to get rid of CeeDee Lamb. Plus, I have Dalton Schultz. Sometimes when you go through drafts and you're not thinking, you're like, oh my God, did I just double up CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz? And I was on the air. That's why it was happening.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, when you're trying, we did a draft at drroto.com where me and Jonathan Danger Cole, we were hosting while we were drafting. I don't think, unless you've done it, it's one of the more difficult things because you're keeping the conversation going. You're playing your part. At the same time, you're looking at your board and you're like, okay, I know who I want. And then that guy, whoever it may be, gets taken while you're over here doing this. And you're like, all right, let me go select him. And you don't even realize he just got took a pick or two before. So it's a lot of balls up in the air. And drafting, you have to kind of play chess with it, with your roster building anyway. So it's a lot to do while you're broadcasting live.
No, 100%. And so I lost out on that one. But let's talk about some wide. I don't want you to give away everything that you're going to give. I want everybody to go out and read your story. And by the time this is released, hopefully your article will be up on drroto.com. Who's the guy we should be looking at wide receiver wise this week? Who's going to pop off?
I'm going to break down the wide receiver cornerback. We got a wide receiver cornerback tool over there. It shows where they're taking the reps, who they're matchup percent, all of that as well. I'll break that down, write that up a little bit later today. But what I did write earlier in this week is I took guys basically by tiers and told you in each tiers, which was the guy, like guys that I liked in those tiers, but who's the one that if you're going to go with one, you're going to pull the trigger, who's it going to be? Let's start with that top tier. You got Cooper Kupp, 9,900. He's getting 14 to 15 targets every week, but you're going to pay a premium for it. You've got Devontae Adams, $1,500 left at 8,400. Justin Jefferson, 9,300. Chase, 100, like all of those guys. But if you're going to say, all right, I'm spinning up on one, who you going with? I'm taking the discount of Devontae Adams, 900 under Justin Jefferson and 1,500 under Cooper Kupp. And a lot of the reason why we know Renfro went in concussion protocol towards the end of that game. So if he's not 100%, if they're not targeting him as much, the uptick's going to be there for Waller and Devontae Adams, who we saw had 17 targets week one. The Titans defense, both of these teams are 0-2. And the Titans don't surprise me. The Raiders surprised me, them being 0-2. This is a better team than that on both sides of the ball. I think they really start to click. The chemistry's there from Fresno State with Carr and Adams. And at a 1,500 discount of Kupp, he's already got 17 targets week one. Last week, people were going to be down on him. Like, well, what do you have? 2 catches, 7 targets, or whatever it was. So they're going to be down, not want to pay up. Zig where they zag. That's what I like to do. If it makes sense, don't do it just to do it. But here it makes sense because the Titans, they've got one really talented corner in Kristen Fulton. Didn't play last week, injured, limited, I think, yesterday in practice. Then you've got other guys like Caleb Farley. They don't have the DBs to hold Devontae Adams for longer than a second. And so I think Devontae Adams' workload is going to be heavy this week, and I'm taking the discount, and in that tier, I'm going Devontae Adams. I like the matchup a lot.
All right. And listen, if you want the rest of this great information, you got to go to the website. We can't make you give it away all here, but I love Devontae Adams this week as well. It's interesting with the Raiders and the Titans. This is the third time in NFL history that two teams who made the playoffs have met in week 3, both teams being 0-2.
Wow.
And the road team has won both contests.
Oh, that's
not that it matters.
No, that's a great nugget, though. You've got to drop that. I didn't even know that. That's a great nugget.
But the little things that we do right there is, but listen, we're going to let you go. I want to thank you so much for being here and being a part of the show. And it's a lot of fun. As you can see right there, you can follow him on Twitter at Jayson with the Y, Jayson Braddock, and follow all of his great work. If you're a fan of Houston football, or if you're a fan of fantasy football, he is somebody you should be following. And thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thank you guys for sharing the airwaves and sending out the invitation. I appreciate it. It was a joy. Enjoy the game Sunday.
Yeah, the pleasure was all ours. Thanks. And maybe we'll do it. If you want to come back to the island, you have an open invitation. That's an open-ended ticket. So anytime you want to join us again, just let us know. Oh,
absolutely. Anytime, reach out. Let me know I'm here. I enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Adam. Y'all take care.
Thank you, Jayson. It was a blast. There he goes. The great Jayson Braddock. What a great, a twofer of Ranks rivals that transition into Fantasy Island. Sammy is doing great work booking this show, and I want to thank everybody for being a part of the program today. And this is going to be an interesting time for the Chicago Bears. Like, this is the one. This is where we will allow you to be a little panicky if things don't work in our direction. But again, like, this is a good team. Like, we're not going up against a slouch. We're going up against a team that's very formidable, but we can rattle Davis Mills. We can get to him. We have the defense to do it. And I think that Matt Eberflus has coached against this Houston Texans team quite a lot. So this is a very familiar foe. Yeah, I know you think about playing the Green Bay Packers and you're like, there's a lot of familiarity. To the fans, there is. To Matt Eberflus, this is a game where all the familiarity is on his side. He knows this team. He's studied against this team twice a year for the last 4 years. So this is the game where we should go out there and expect the Bears to really go out there, have a great game plan, really limit the Texans, and of course, offensively, hopefully start getting back on track, because we're too good. There's too many good players for it to look like it looked on Sunday night. Now, I want to thank all of our sponsors once again. Underdog Fantasy, really appreciate them coming aboard. Again, download the app, use the code SICK. If you need an air purifier, Air Pura is there for you to protect your family. And of course, if you're in the Southern California area, Rip Beer Company is the place to be on Sunday morning. We'll be watching the Bears game there. I will be a half hour late. I will be doing the fantasy show on the whatever app they put it on. I don't even know. Like, we do a fantasy show. They're like, hey, you got to do this show. Like, where is it? Is it on the Red Zone? No. Is it on the network? No. But I don't know. We do a show. And apparently it was very important for me to be there this week. So in any event, after that show, I will be at Rip Beer Company, hopefully to see a Bears victory. So for everybody here, for Mark, for Jayson, and of course our great staff here at Sick Media, Sammy, thank you so much for everything. Let's go get a win this week. Bear down, and go ahead and play us out.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Adam Rank on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. Brought to you by Underdog Fantasy and Air Pura.